Freud wrote a very interesting book, Psychopathology of Everyday Life. Discussion today will focus on this book. And of course, we can't complete the whole book, but we'll take up a few interesting features of the book. And before we go there, we will take an overview of the whole book. So what does Freud mean by psychopathology of everyday life? As the title suggests, Freud is saying that everyday life is not free of psychopathology. Usually, we differentiate between a group of people that we call patients and the rest of the society. And the idea is that pathology resides in the group of patients and the rest of the society is free of pathology. Freud does not agree with that classification. Freud believes, as does psychoanalysis, that normalcy and pathology are on the same continuum. It is just too much of something or too little of something that becomes a pathology. And therefore, Freud and psychoanalysis both don't separate the regular society from patients. And there is some virtue in looking at society in this way. We can see that even the most normal men, so-called, are capable of committing the worst possible in different situations.
Yes.
We can also see what is going on today in terms of the Gulf War.
Yes.
That we can see aggression and death instinct,
Yes.
pathological greed and pathological quest for power, and pathological
Pride.
in ideology. We can see where it leads to. And in
Yes.
entire history of our species, we can't find 50 years of peace.
Yes.
So we find that even the so-called normal men who don't come as patients, they actually are not normal if you raise the standards adequately high. In fact, we have artificially lowered the standards to suit ourselves, and therefore the definition of normalcy is a convenient and a social definition, not strictly speaking a scientific definition. And therefore, normalcy has various definitions. One of them is what we usually take as no impairment in work or personal relationships, or absence of symptoms. Now, the idea of normalcy, therefore, is different in DSM, the psychiatric aspect of it, and psychoanalysis. In psychoanalysis, the idea of pathology is very broad, and therefore, people get divided into the normal neurotics and the troubled neurotics. But there is nobody who is perfectly healthy. Meaning, there is nothing like a perfect body or a perfect mind. And if we investigate deep enough, we find pathology in practically every person. It may not be pathology to DSM standards, but definitely a pathology by psychoanalytic standards. And when Freud says psychopathology of everyday life, he is using the psychoanalytic definition of pathology and not DSM definition of pathology. Psychoanalysis also has this old joke, how nobody can be normal. The joke goes as this: if a patient comes on time, he is obsessive. If he comes early, he is anxious. if he comes late, he is avoidant. Under no circumstances can he be normal. So that is the background with which we enter psychopathology of everyday life. And the first idea here is that everyday life is full of psychopathology if we care enough to investigate and find it. And the regular society that we meet in everyday life is not free of pathology, which means pathology pervades the whole of human society, whether the group of regular people or the group of patients. And this psychopathology, which pervades society every day, has been normalized by culture. Just because it is normalized does not mean it does not exist. One can give example of corona, that because corona happens to everybody does not mean corona is not a sickness. The same thing happens here, that some pathologies are universal, and when they are universal, they are normalized by culture and no longer designated as a pathology, but accepted as regular feature of human existence or of society. So with this perspective, this screen in the background, let us enter into the book. This book was first published, not book, but this was first published as a monograph for psychiatry and neurology in 1901 by Freud. And in 1904, this got republished as a book. And during Freud's life, it got translated into 12 foreign languages and became quite popular because everybody wanted to know how psychopathology pervades our existence every day and how it is to be found inside of us and around us. So why is it so pervasive and why is it so easy to find out if you have the tools to find out? The first is, when we talk of everyday and normal people that we meet every day, we realize that if we examine our existence every day on an everyday basis, we go into the normal realm, we go into the pathological realm, and we go into the supernormal realm. That if we examine 24 hours of our own life, a few hours we see the abnormal is activating, a few hours we see the normal is activating, and maybe a few minutes or a few hours, something above normal, the supernormal is activating. So we pass through all the zones and there is no way we can switch off the unconscious mind. And we can switch off these continuous transitions. Nobody can will or ensure by any means that he remains only in the normal zone 24/7, 365. So the transition is inevitable. And therefore, we will touch our pathology at some point every day. Every day not to be taken literally, but meaning by and large, we will be in touch with our pathology at some intervals of time. Can you switch off the unconscious? No, we cannot. And therefore, whatever we do, we can easily have a mixed unconscious motivation behind it. For example, we may feel very deeply for our patient, which may combine a supernormal movement of very high empathy and humanity with our own savior fantasy in the unconscious. So the savior fantasy can easily go with high sensitivity, high humanity. So we cannot switch off our unconscious, and therefore something pathological can always be mixed with a noble intention. Because they are all in the unconscious. There is one sector of the unconscious which is full of pathology, another section of the unconscious which is full of superego, a third part of unconscious which is just full of unused memories, another part of unconscious which is just full of half-processed material, another part of unconscious which is just full of our mammalian or pre-mammalian traces. So psychopathology doesn't have to be recognized to be a psychopathology. And therefore, psychopathology we can look at in two ways. Psychopathology which is recognized as a psychopathology, which we do in patients, and psychopathology not recognized as such, which we see around us in people and inside of us, but not labeled because it is not intense enough up to DSM standards. So psychopathology, when it is universal, gets normalized. And often psychopathology is unseen because it is in the unconscious, and very few people have the knowledge and the skill to make out what is in the unconscious by looking at a conscious act or a conscious statement. Psychopathology pervades our everyday. We always have unconscious motivations and unconscious satisfactions. It goes on, and some of these unconscious motivations and unconscious satisfactions are of pathological nature. Now, what are the most dramatic expressions of pathology in action every day? Some of the most dramatic expressions of pathology in action in every day is pathology that we see in jokes, pathology that we see in slips. Slips can be speaking slips, reading slips, hearing slips, or writing slips. Pathology that we see in art, pathology that we see in errors we make. Many of the errors we make out of our own guilt and self-sabotage. Many of the errors we make out of our own traumas. And of course, many of the errors we make out of our limitations. That's a separate set of errors altogether. Remembering and forgetting that happens inside of us. What is most easily remembered suddenly is forgotten. What has been forgotten for years is suddenly remembered. So, jokes, slips, art, errors, remembering and forgetting, these are the most dramatic ways in which psychopathology expresses in everyday life. And what Freud does not cover in this book, psychopathology also expresses itself in relationships, in sexuality, in work, and in politics on an everyday basis. So psychopathology is oozing out of the unconscious in all this direction. It's almost like a fountain of psychopathology oozing out through different spaces of human thought, human feelings, human conduct on an everyday basis. Today, what we'll focus upon is this area more than this area. We'll focus more on psychopathology involved in jokes, slips, art, errors, remembering and forgetting, and a few other elements. Not so much on general relationships, general sexuality, general work, or general politics. So let us go into the index of this book, Psychopathology of Everyday Life, and see what Freud covers in this book. What are the chapters? First, Freud covers forgetting of proper names. That on an everyday basis, we can forget name of some person or name of some place. These are proper names, proper nouns. And why we forget the names we know. Now, this may not involve names that we have not used for a long time. We may forget something just out of non-use for years. That's a different category altogether. But what we know and we knew very clearly till a few days back or a few months back, and suddenly we forget. We tell to ourselves, how can I forget this thing? So the first chapter is forgetting of proper names. It covers two things: how we forget proper names and how we substitute one name for the other. Like we can say, I don't know why always I call you Ramesh when I should be calling you Subhash. That when I see you, I don't know, but Ramesh comes to my mind. So these two are covered in this chapter, the forgetting of proper names. What is the unconscious basis of it? Then forgetting of second chapter, forgetting of foreign words. In the first chapter, we forget names because there is something unconscious evoked by those names. Now that may be something literally evoked by a name, or it may be something evoked by an association. For example, let us say a friend of mine is very successful in entrepreneurship. And whenever I remember his name, I also remember my own failure in entrepreneurship. And we both were in the same class in the school. And today he is miles ahead of me. Just look at the slip. Instead of saying miles ahead of me, I was saying miles away from me.
Yeah.
Right? So it is a defensive action to evade one's defeat, somebody else's success, our own envy, and our hatred, which wants him to be away. So such names can be easily forgotten because the moment you remember it, you also remember something which is unbearable to oneself. Or the substitution of names, often because one likes X over Y. And therefore, when you have to say Y, instead of saying Y, you say X. Or when somebody hates somebody. So when there is an aggressive statement to make, and if you hate Y, then instead of X, you say Y. So the substitution can happen out of liking. The substitution can also happen out of hatred. Forgetting often is because it is loaded with memories. And that is the whole mechanism of amnesia. That whether the amnesia is circumscribed or whether it is universal, whether it is blocking a particular age bracket, let's say age 2 to 4, or it may be selective that only certain events are blocked, that memories related to social occasions are blocked. So it may be a selective amnesia or age-related amnesia or a universal amnesia. But any kind of amnesia will be a defense against feelings which are evoked. Forgetting of foreign words. Something that we used to flaunt around at one point, that we know foreign words, suddenly we forget. For example, words like, for Indians, it will be like, say, Greek and Latin for, say, ab initio, de facto, post facto. And suddenly we forget those words. So there Freud talks about emotional interference and unconscious resistance, forgetting of foreign words. And in Freud's time, this was very common in case of hysteria. That a language known by a patient, suddenly the patient forgets. Or reverse of it, a language which the patient never spoke, the person starts speaking when in hysteria. Forgetting of names or series of words. This is the third element that Freud covers. That you keep forgetting a specific series of words. and you keep forgetting some names, may not be proper names. It may just be a general name of something like a spoon or a knife or a clock or a computer. So this Freud talks about associative blocking, that this general name is associated to some story where difficult emotions are involved and therefore it's blocked. Then Freud talks about childhood and concealing memories. This is very important. Freud talks about screen memories. Now, screen memories are very important. So what are screen memories? Screen memories are those memories where a visual comes before you, but you can't make out anything other than a visual. There is no story that comes, only it's almost like a print screen. Let us say a movie is going on a computer and you do print screen. So what will happen? A slice of that visual will be taken, but you don't do anything else. So what Freud says is that just as you do print screen today, that comes up, but the whole movie is repressed. That the screen memory is a print screen of some moment in a movie. The movie is in the unconscious, only that print screen memory is coming up. It's almost like a screen, a two-dimensional screen in front of you. It's almost like a photograph. That you get a photograph in front of you of an entire event, but it is so repressed that for years you may have only the photograph and not get the story of it. And I have had screen memories where it just comes to me for years and I don't know the full story. Rather, I don't want to know the full story. Otherwise, I would have put my mind to it and probably got it. And that is how our will is also under the control partly of our unconscious. It's not completely free. So screen memories, they are like zip files. That the more you unpack, the more things come out of it. And then slowly the whole movie comes up. So Freud talks about screen memories, which people have on an everyday basis, or they talk about it often. Not every day in the literal sense, but most people have some sort of screen memories. Second, Freud talks about is distorted childhood recollections. Recollections of childhood which are not accurate. And this opens up a very large question that when you recollect, are you recollecting or are you recreating? Is it possible to recollect without recreation? And some people on the extreme believe that we keep recreating something. I don't agree to it. I feel there are both. There are literal recollections as they are, and there are distorted recollections of what it was. Both happen. And we can take 3 examples. One, somebody literally recollects accurately what it was. Second, somebody recollects something worse than what it actually was. What Freud encountered in his patients, that some patients love to talk about trauma which actually never happened. Either they are lying for attention and sympathy, or they are lying to escape some responsibility, or their unconscious has feigned it. It's a trauma fantasy. Similarly, on the other hand, we can have recollections of nostalgia, where we recreate the past positively. So there can be a traumatic distortion of the past, or there can be a nostalgic positive distortion of the past. So in nostalgia, we recollect the past far better than it actually was. And we start recollecting things which were not actually completely accurate. So I use a term for it. I say the dream we never had. And there is a book on similar subject called The Sublime Object of Ideology, which says, it's by Zizek, Slavoj Zizek, and he says every ideology, the pursuit of every ideology is actually a pursuit of some perfect state in the past which we never had. We believe that in the childhood sometime we had a perfect state, and that perfect state we want to re-establish in society outside. And that is what every ideology is all about. That every ideology is in pursuit of a perfect social state. And the deeper unconscious belief is that once upon a time we had it and therefore it's possible. But the reality is that we actually never had it. Now there can be an in-between thing, that we may not have had it as a stage, but we may have had it as a state. Meaning, what Freud refers to as the experiences of primary narcissism, the experience of completeness, the experience of ecstasy, the experience of bliss, the experience of no one except the one. There is no I and not I. There is one oceanic experience. And there is no disturbance of reality. That state of primary narcissism, it may not be a stage, but definitely it can be a state. And that may be something that we are chasing. So it may not be that we have never experienced it, but we experience it probably intermittently. So Freud talks about screen memories and distorted childhood recollections and emotional disguise of important event in this chapter on childhood and concealing memories. And of course, all of this, if you see, they are pervasive across society. It is not that these things happen only to the group of patients. They happen to everyone. Then Freud talks about symptomatic and chance actions, the small repetitive behaviors, the nervous habits, the random acts with meaning. And this is something that we encounter in patients, and we also encounter in non-patients. Like many people have the habit of cleaning everything very often. They may not qualify for OCPD or OCD, but a pre-OCPD you can always see in them. And of course, in therapy, we can very clearly see it. But we are not talking of therapy here. We are talking of everyday life. Otherwise, the same thing is true in therapy. Like Carl Jung had a psychotic patient, a girl, a lady, an old lady. And she was constantly doing these actions. And she was diagnosed for schizophrenia. Largely negative symptoms except for this action. She has withdrawn completely into a world of her own, except for this action. In fact, this action also she had withdrawn. And Carl Jung later found out that she was doing this. This was action of stitching of a cobbler. And her problem started when her cobbler boyfriend dished her for another woman. And she was fixated on that trauma. And this action was, in one way, a denial of loss. That because the cobbler's actions are still on, the cobbler is still there. So, of course, Freud here does not talk about the patients, but on an everyday basis, we see symptomatic and chance actions. Chance actions are those random actions that we don't know why somebody does it, but if we psychoanalyze deep enough, we find out why he did what he did. Then Freud talks about errors, miscalculations, confusions, cognitive slips which happen. That often the errors we make, the miscalculation we do, the confusions we have on an everyday basis, how the unconscious factors are responsible for it. Like out of fear, one may miscalculate on the higher side what is to be paid to somebody. Out of fear, one may miscalculate on the lower side what one has to ask somebody. One may feel confused out of catastrophic thinking when a challenge is in front of him. Cognitive slips can happen driven by unconscious motives. 11th, he deals with combined faulty acts, multiple errors which we do at once. That someday the anxiety is so high that we keep doing one error after another. Patterns of slips, parapraxis means slips. Patterns of our slips, that someday the slips keep happening one after the other. All of it suggests activation of a strong unconscious conflict. 12th, he deals with determinism, chance, and superstition. And he says, are accidents really accidental, or do we occasionally cause it? That can our own aggression and our own guilt or our own anxiety really cause accidents? And some examples we can take. I can give a few examples. When I was learning driving and I was extremely anxious in parking, especially in rivers, often I felt that if some damage occurred, that would be better than the anxiety that the damage will happen. That anticipatory anxiety is worse than the sadness of loss. So some accidents may happen just because somebody is too terrified of something happening and actually makes it happen. Or because of some reason, anxiety has gone very high. For example, somebody is caught in a traffic jam, suddenly feels claustrophobic. And out of that claustrophobia, just presses the accelerator too hard and something happens. Second example, if somebody is so full of anger and he is walking very slowly and the leg comes in contact with some glass and a slight scratch happens, very, very superficial. Because of his anger, he may not withdraw the leg, but actually take it forward and enlarge the cut. Now, this is very psychologically determined. You can say it was an accident. I did not plant that glass there. I was walking, it just happened to be there. But that is not the full story. Half of it is true. But the first slight cut was accidental, but later you dragged it on. That was unconscious, not accident. So half of that is accident, half of that is not an accident. For example, give you an example. Other example, you complete a very good assignment, very top quality assignment, and you have to send it to a very high authority. And it is on the desktop. But you don't attach your work, rather you attach a wrong file in the attachment. That is a self-destructive thing. out of your own aggression and guilt or your own unresolved Oedipus. So Freud talks about this. Then Freud talks about how people relegate their own inadequacies or their own laziness to luck, to fate. And there, I think we will have to limit Freud's wisdom. We'll have to take that, how should I put it?
Some people are actually lucky.
Yeah. We have to take that audacious mischief, so not mischief, but that audacious decision to limit Freud's wisdom on this point. That here we are looking at three different things. We are looking at accidents which are actual accidents. We are looking at accidents which are caused by the unconscious. And we are looking at belief in fate, which intuitively we know is true. For example, somebody may have a very deep intuition that if I start this business, it will fail. Now, one may say that it is an unconscious belief of inferiority and he is just making it come true. Because of self-sabotage or because of I am not good enough or something. But it may also be that indeed it is an intuition. So there we would have to limit Freud's labeling of this kind of intuition as something pathological. That there can be pathology masquerading as intuition, but there can also be pure intuition, which is not pathological. And many people have very good intuition of this type, where they intuitively know what something is, how something is going to turn out. And in India, there is, to aid this intuition, a complete science of omenology. That just as we feel intuitively that something is going to happen or not going to happen, simultaneously, universe gives us various signals in the form of omens. And people have identified those omens and studied them very deeply. So there is a complete omenology which accompanies this intuition. And of course, your prior experience with intuition also is at work. So there we would have to say that what Freud says has limitations, but to 75%, what he says is true. That people out of their unconscious motivations or unconscious functioning easily go into superstition, chance and luck and fate. So let us start with the first psychopathology in everyday life. So this is the chapter scheme of the book. Now let us go into for some of the interesting parts of the book. We start with slips, what Freud calls parapraxis. Slips can be in speech, writing, hearing, or reading. Let us take some examples. A man introducing his wife says, "This is my first wife. I mean my wife." So the unconscious desire comes out. That I wish she was only the first one and had many more to come. Husband tells his wife, "Your hair are going grey. Why don't you just dye?" So one is dye, meaning apply dye on the hair. Second is You are old, no longer interesting. Why don't you just die? I can have somebody else. A professor asks the student, how are you? And the student says, disappointed. I mean, delighted to see you. Now, all of these have unconscious motivations. In the first part, it is unconscious wish. In the second, there is an unconscious wish. In the third, there is an unconscious aggression. Aggression in the unconscious, which cannot be expressed. Now, let us come to the slips in writing. Right? I have received your letter, and you say, I hate received your letter. Instead of HAVE, you write HATE. And one letter changes the whole meaning. So it tells you the unconscious reality that there is hatred towards receiving your letter. The unconscious hatred leaks out through this slip in writing. Slips in hearing. There is a song in Hindi, and there are two lines of the songs I have put here. The real line is, तुम प्रणय के देवता हो, मैं समर्पित फूल हूं. And somebody listened to it as to mean, तुम प्रलय के देवता हो, मैं समर्पित फूल हूं. So pranay turns into pralay. And this tells us something about the relationship the person had with his parents in early childhood.
And the fool also is from English.
Yeah. So it is like he saw the important emotional figures in early life as terrifying. That the object of love was also terrifying. Somebody who can cause pralay. So there was projection of omnipotence. That there was love and projection of omnipotence. The split was open. The other was idealized, and there was projection of omnipotence, and oneself was de-idealized. तुम देवता हो, मैं फूल हूं, समर्पित फूल हूं. I am at your feet and I am very delicate. I am very small. You are very strong and you are omnipotent. So, if somebody has this slip of hearing, it tells us that in the childhood, the split was open. Idealization, de-idealization happened. The parents were seen as terrifying. Just give me a moment. Sorry. So,
No problem.
It tells us that this slip happens because in the childhood, there was some sort of object loss. There was some sort of object attack. Split was open. Idealization, de-idealization happened. And the object of love was also seen as a terrifying object. So the slip gives away the events of the childhood far more than earlier slips. Like these slips, they give away something in the unconscious, but this gives away almost a story of the child. Slips in reading. I can give you two of my personal examples. A few days back, I wanted an NOC letter from a bank. I repaid their loan long back, but I still have not got the NOC. So the hypothecation was showing, so I wanted the NOC letter. I wrote to the bank and the bank wrote to me saying, you go to the branch and from there, send us the exact location of the branch and the number so we can send the letter. I got in mind somehow that I have to go to the branch and they will issue me a letter.
Uh-huh.
So I went to the branch and I said, this is what I have got from my head office. Yes, they said, yes, but this says you only have to send the number and the exact address. They will send NOC here and then you can collect it from here. So this is a slip in reading.
Yeah.
That unconsciously I wanted to make it easy, and the complication was appearing catastrophic to my unconscious. And in order to avoid the catastrophic thinking, I had this misjudgment. Second slip in reading is I got a message many years back that on a particular Sunday, I had to meet a group of people at Sardar Colony, Baroda. Now, I don't know what happened, but I read this as Sardar Colony, Nadiyad. It's a completely different city. And I spent entire Sunday searching there, Sardar Colony.
Wow.
And it never occurred to me that I should call up that person and verify. And after 2-3 hours, I called up that person and he said, it's Baroda, it's not Nadiyad. And that I attribute to fate. I am not sure how much of that is fate and how much of that is my unconscious pathology. But these slips can happen in reading. So one psychopathology in everyday life is slips in speech, writing, hearing, and reading. Any questions on this?
Sir, just a moment.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, any questions on this slips?
Not actually, but initially I had some question. For example, forgetting the names. If it happens because of age or after heart surgery, then perhaps it can be organic.
Correct. Also blood pressure.
Functional. Yeah. Okay.
Blood pressure is an adverse effect on memory, no doubt about it.
Oh.
Because before I had high BP, my memory was completely different. So it can be because of organic causes also. But here Freud is talking
Yes.
about that set of events which are psychically driven.
Yes. Yes. It is much more frequent than we suspect, actually.
Correct. Correct.
In reality, it is much more frequent.
Correct. So not only there are slips, but slips slip through our attention.
Yes.
So what happens is the truth slips through the slips. The truth of the unconscious slips through the slips. So we always say, ensure you don't slip into a slip. So let us have a few examples of how the slips have occurred in public. How something has happened on television, how something has happened in a political rally, right? To see how these slips happen on an everyday basis. So we can watch this for some moment and I'll stop the recording for that part.
Yes.
So we can see in that video how publicly the slips happen. And there are 3 links here. One is related to political events where political leaders made that slip. So these are very important. Like it happens every day. And that tells you about how pathology is oozing out, leaking out. Freud then goes to something very interesting. He goes into the pathology in art, the psychopathology that is expressed through art, and especially in drama. And what happens to what the characters that we see on the stage. So Freud talks about the whole idea of drama, that drama is to adults what play is to children. And that is true practically of much of art, but specific to drama, it deals with at an unconscious level wish fulfillment, catharsis, and healing. And if we look at the Greeks said drama has to involve evoking of emotions. And mostly it was tragedy. Therefore, the term the Greek tragedy. That the Greeks thought of art, one of the functions of art was catharsis. And it evokes emotions. And we relish those emotions. That even if it is melancholic emotions, we evoke those melancholic, not only evoke, we relish those melancholic emotions. And then Freud goes to say that so many of pathological feelings, aggression, sadism, masochism, wish fulfillment, suspension of reality, which is actually opposite of reality acceptance, tragedy, and evoking of emotion, they all happen in the drama. And obviously, this can happen only if identification happens. If somebody in the audience does not identify with somebody on the stage, he would look at it only as a spectator, not actually as an audience. He would not be involved in it. And for involvement, you have to identify with someone so that his pain becomes your pain. His triumph becomes your triumph. His anxiety becomes your anxiety. And unless one is lost in that story in some way, one cannot actually have the experience for which one has gone there. So he says, in the drama, we see aggression, we see sadism, we see masochism, we see unreal wish fulfillment. And what we call art in general and drama in particular, it can also include novels, it can also include paintings, music, and so on. But they involve a lot of things which are actually pathological in nature. If you raise the standards of normalcy high enough, many of these are pathological. Many of them would be designated as crimes by law if they were to occur in reality. Like murder on the screen, the hero stealing something from a rich man on the screen. In real life, it would be a crime. Not only a moral sin, but actually a legal sin. And it would be deemed pathological. Not only pathological, but criminal. So he says, so much of what we would call pathological actually happens in art, and it just passes away without any resistance. In fact, it is appreciated, not only appreciated, rewarded. Not only rewarded, we have awards for it. That what a film gets awarded for may contain so much of pathological material. But we don't see that pathology as pathology, we see that as a work of art. And therefore, so much of psychopathology passes off in art without being called its name. And one of the core things that happens is suspension of reality. That we cannot enjoy art unless our sense of reality is suspended to some extent. And if we go to therapy or psychiatry, the ideal is reality acceptance. And here what we do is the opposite of it, reality suspension. That you have to let go of reality acceptance and go into reality suspension for some time to really enjoy art. So many of pathological things which happen. And Freud says the enjoyment in art and drama actually can be neurotic or psychotic. You can have both kinds of enjoyments. For example, in neurotic enjoyment, there is an enjoyment of transgression, but there is also a resistance of the superego. That the id is able to enjoy transgression, but in the face of some resistance, some active resistance from the ego and the superego. It's a neurotic enjoyment where one may identify with somebody who is beating up somebody, but the superego is not completely absent. Or one can have psychotic enjoyment where one can purely get involved in enjoyment with pathological identification without any resistance. Meaning, it can happen in two ways. Let us say there is a scene in the movie. Let us take a recent movie, Dhurandhar. There is a scene in the movie where the villain is torturing an innocent person. And if one if one feels anxious, it is a neurotic enjoyment. If one feels anger towards the villain, it's a neurotic enjoyment. But let us say somebody identifies with the villain as though he wants to torture. It's a pathological identification. That when a torture scene is displayed on the screen, if you identify with the perpetrator rather than the victim, it's a very pathological kind of identification. And in some cases, there may be no resistance and one may be involved in pure enjoyment. That kind of enjoyment in art, which happens to many people when they enjoy art, is a psychotic enjoyment. So human behavior, human existence, human experience in the realm of art involves so much of psychopathology, which is not called out by its name.
Can I ask a doubt here, please?
Yes, please.
If someone identifies with the victim when it is shown on the screen, but identifies excessively with the victim and feels more misery than one should, forgetting that it is a theater or it is a screen thing and it is false. So, falling in the frame, or what we call that, inability to keep the distance. So, how do we diagnose, analyze that, and treat that?
That brings up the question of capacity to enjoy art.
Uh,
For example, if somebody has too much material inside of him unresolved, certain forms of art he may not be able to enjoy. He may get overwhelmed. Many people say, I don't watch a horror movie.
Oh.
Because after that, for 3-4 days, I am afraid of the dark. Many people say, I can't enjoy a movie which involves torture or aggression too much. So that brings up the whole idea of capacity to enjoy art. And the more our unconscious is loaded and unresolved, less will be the capacity. So when the capacity is less, it is better to find out what we cannot bear and avoid it as interim measure till we work on ourselves and get to the location of enjoying difficult art. In fact, people who have very severe repression of affect, what we call isolation of affect, they don't watch movies because the very evocation of emotion is very uncomfortable to them. So often you will see that when capacity to manage one's evocation of affect is impaired, one avoids movies. And later on, one will, if it continues to aggravate, one will move from avoiding movies to avoiding even songs, music and songs. So we will keep avoiding anything that evokes affect. Or one is traumatized by one's parents, and therefore one may avoid any movie which has lot of parent-child interaction. Or one has too much anxiety entangled with one's sexuality, and therefore one may avoid those particular type of movies. So if somebody is overwhelmed by a particular scene in the movie, or one is very vehemently avoiding seeing a particular movie, all the more reason to focus upon it. Because then we know that it's deeply disturbing something in the unconscious.
Yes.
Should we stop for a cup of tea and come back in 10 minutes?
Yes, sir. I will. Thank you.
So we started off with defining psychopathology in everyday life, and we see it's pervasive everywhere. There is no day where pathology is not seen in our life, either in ourselves or in others. And Freud in this book goes into various elements where psychopathology is seen in everyday human existence. So we started off with art and specifically drama. Now we move ahead. In drama, Freud spends some time on this example in his book of Hamlet. To be or not to be is the question. And that in a way is universal. It's an eternal life situation where one has to weigh risk and reward in taking a decision. And Hamlet is fixated. He is almost paralyzed in making that decision. To be or not to be. It becomes far more than something to be thought out. It becomes almost a fixating thing, almost an obsession. And that is where the Oedipal non-resolution comes up. That when one is toggling on to be or not to be, it's a repeat of the Oedipal situation to do or not to do. And because the audience enjoys art largely by identification, Freud says the skill of the artist is in allowing what is unacceptable to pass in a small measure across the resistance. That what is communicated in art would meet resistance in normal way, in a normal situation. And the skill is to allow that unconscious thing pass the resistance of the ego. And therefore, in small amounts, the affect is released. In small amounts, the transgression is done. And this is almost like therapy. That in therapy also, in small amounts, the affect is released. In small amounts, transgressions happen, and then they get considered in the light of analysis. And we can see neurotic characters who have so pathologies, like Hamlet is fixated in the Oedipus to be or not to be. Professor Higgins in My Fair Lady, he is fixated in his narcissism and his fear of emotional closeness. Sherlock Holmes is fixated in his narcissism and his anal Oedipal entanglements. Similarly, we can have psychotic characters. Like these are Hamlet, Professor Higgins, Sherlock Holmes. These are very popular neurotic characters. Now, if you ask people, this will be favorites of many people, they won't recognize the pathology behind it, either in the characters or in them as to why they like it. But there will be pathology, not called off by its name. But similarly, you can have very popular psychotic characters, like Silence of the Lambs. I forget the name of the character. Dr. Lecter. Dr. Lecter in Silence of the Lamb. Hannibal, the same character. In Alfred Hitchcock movie, The Psycho. The movie where the psycho kills people and preserves the dead corpse of his mother years after the mother has passed away. And occasionally goes, visits that corpse and talks to that corpse. So you had a series of that, Psycho 1, Psycho 2, Psycho 3, the movies. So we can have popular neurotic characters, we can have popular psychotic characters, and one can go into why people like these characters. And if somebody likes psychotic characters, obviously there are things deep inside why somebody likes this and not someone else. Another thing that Freud talks about is that art can give one-time enjoyment or long-term enjoyment. One-time enjoyment is where you identify with something, you have wish fulfillment, your catharsis, whatever, and it's done. But there's something called long-term enjoyment, where one keeps rereading the same thing over and over again. One keeps revisiting, re-looking at it. And that is where we have an entanglement somewhere with that thing. That it is not one episode done and dusted. We have a neurotic entanglement, and that provides a long-term enjoyment. That long-term enjoyment may be every time we do it, there is a wish fulfillment, or every time we do it, there is a bit of catharsis, or every time we do it, we understand a part of us better because there is something like us in that work of art. So there is a long-term entanglement, and that happens when there is something left to discover. Everything is not opened out in the open. That there is something mysterious, something unknown, somewhere where the closure has not been done. And one keeps thinking, will the next sequel of this thing come? In the next episode, will the person do X or Y? Or why did X do Y? I still can't make out. When everything is not explained, everything is not clear, it creates a different kind of relationship to piece of art, that unknown, that enigma, something that has not exhausted itself, creates a neurotic entanglement. And we keep enjoying the same piece of art over and over again. So there again we see psychopathology at work. Then Freud comes to a very interesting, juicy part of the book, which is about the jokes. And ironically enough, and hilariously enough, but not ridiculously enough, Freud starts or talks about defining a joke. And one can say, if you go into defining a joke, it's a joke itself. So the first thing Freud does is Freud differentiates between the joke and a comic situation. Comic situations are different. They are not jokes. For example, somebody puts his feet on a banana peel and slips over, and everyone laughs at him. Now, that's a comic situation. It's not really a joke. So, Freud differentiates between a comic situation and a joke. So, what is a joke? A joke is done or said or done to provoke laughter or amusement, especially a short story with a humorous punchline. One definition. Second definition, this is itself hilarious that we are talking about defining a joke. A joke is a brief oral or written narrative that contains incongruity, wordplay, or unexpected meaning designed to produce humor. It's almost like a Japanese haiku where the last line changes the meaning of the whole thing. A joke is a cognitive stimulus that creates amusement by resolving incongruity or releasing emotional tension. So now we are getting into the prose of poetry. We are getting into definition of a joke. And Freud's definition is this, which is in the bold. A joke is a verbal expression that uses specific techniques to release repressed or unconscious thoughts, producing pleasure through lifting of psychic inhibition. That indirectly the repression is lessened and something leaks out from the unconscious. It may be a wish or it may be some negative effect, and that is felt as relief or as pleasure, and that is what produces the happiness. That either it is increase in pleasure or reduction in pre-existing tension. The modern psychology explains jokes as jokes are jokes either because of incongruity or providing relief or providing superiority. That we may be overcoming our inferiority by making fun of somebody in the form of a joke, but that actually is addressing our inferiority and our envy at his superiority. So we may be joking about someone, but it may be a movement of inferiority and envy inside of us, in the unconscious. So this is about one first part of it. Then it differentiates jokes into two. Yeah, you had something to say. You are muted.
It was about the film and theater. I was discussing with Dr. Agashe sir that I can't tolerate movies. His movies are particularly painful. He could give me this Sikh moral out of the picture and I will take it. But going through all that pain is very painful. And then the discussion, I said I liked a particular film because it did not hijack my emotion. Just because of the capacity that you have to hijack the emotion of other people, you should not be doing it in each film or each theater. He said, yeah, that is the Brechtian style. Bertolt Brecht would say that people, the audience should be, his analyzing ego should be left intact and he should not get carried away in the emotion.
Right.
There are certain films and works of art that do not make you emotional, but they're excellent.
Correct.
There are
So,
others that are.
yeah. So they move you, but they don't move you to discomfort.
Yeah. And they provoke the thinking and not just
Correct.
whipping you to the.
Correct. So Freud talks about two types of jokes, the innocent ones and the tendentious ones.
Mm-hmm.
In innocent ones, there is a word play or use of pun or linguistic tricks. There's the hostility or taboo content. He gives an example. I used to be a banker, but I lost interest. So there's a word play.
Yeah.
Nobody is being attacked. And sexuality is not oozing out. Inferiority is not oozing out. So you have innocent jokes, innocent humor, and a motivated humor. So in tendentious jokes, we often find unconscious content. Like so the innocent jokes may not have much of psychological content except a desire for pleasure or desire for art. Now one can say every creative act is an act of reparation in the unconscious. The Kleinian will say this. But for a moment, if we keep that extreme position aside, we can allow innocent jokes to be innocent and look at unconscious in case of tendentious jokes, problematic jokes. And these problematic jokes can be divided into two: the hostile jokes, which involve aggression, ridicule, or satire, and obscene jokes, which involve sexual content or something dirty. So this obviously involve a lot of pathology. So there again we see in tendentious jokes such a huge psychopathology involved in an everyday life. And this we see not only in people speaking, but even enacted in TV serials, on YouTube, in movies. Like in movies, they say, you must have the spice of aggression, humor, romance, sex, and music. Without this spice mix, the movie won't sell. Indirectly, they are saying that we must cater to these unconscious aspects, otherwise the movie won't sell. That we must cater to the unconscious desire for romance and sex. We must cater to the unconscious desire of aggression. We must cater to remove the guilt for some time so that aggression can come out without guilt. And we must cater to some wish fulfillment. And we must cater to overcoming of shame. Only then the movie will sell. So if you look at the marketing logic, marketing principles, and if you psychoanalyze them, they are dealing with the same things in the unconscious. So tendentious jokes, most of the movies, and even marketing of the movies, advertising per se, that is all involving psychopathology of everyday life. Much of advertising involves in some way engaging with psychopathology of everyday life. So what are the mechanisms of joke creation? So Freud says something, but we can in general say we have to step aside, look at the meaning, find the hidden meaning, and find the hidden meaning to involve some humor, light or dark. This has to happen in the consumption, and we have to create the joke in a way that this happens in consumption. That the listener, once he listens to a joke, is able to step aside, look at the joke, and see some humor, light or dark. You can have light humor or dark humor. Like Charlie Chaplin was known for dark humor. If you see his movie Modern Times, it's a satire on the industrial society. It's a dark humor. And the mechanism of creativity obviously has to be involved in joke creation. So the primary process has to involve, and what Winnicott says, unorganization of the ego. That the ego gives up reality orientation for a moment without disintegration. It steps back without disintegration. That is how the flexibility of reality suspension happens. That on demand, one is able to step back, and on demand, one is able to regain one's reality position. That one is able to give up reality acceptance for 3 hours in the theater, and once one is out of the theater, one is back into reality position. It is on-demand reality suspension, which is very different from compulsive reality suspension of the psychotic. Because there, the ego disintegrates. Here, it is just unorganization of the ego's control. Or rather, a good word would be the ego steps back without disintegration. Now, Freud points out something very important, that if we look at the mechanism of jokes and dreams, they are very alike. Jokes and dreams both reveal the unconscious. In both the cases, the real unconscious material is disguised, and one comes to know of it only by interpretation. Both jokes and dreams allow forbidden wishes to surface safely. They pass through the repression barrier by disguise. And Freud identified several techniques in analyzing jokes as well as creation of jokes exactly like that in dreams. The difference being dreams are private and jokes are social. That's the difference. And therefore, the repression barrier is far more active in jokes than in dreams. In general, except for very obscene jokes where the jokes are as explicit as dreams. And one can look at not only jokes, but also myths. Myths also work on similar lines. That something is in the unconscious, undergoes a disguise, gets packaged in a story, and comes out in the conscious as a myth. And the same is true partly of bad words. One of my teachers wanted to analyze bad words of different parts of India. Bad words spoken in Gujarat, Maharashtra, all states. And when we analyze bad words, we see a lot of them contain Oedipal or anal material. So they betray the Oedipal and anal fantasies or Oedipal and anal ideas loaded with sexuality or aggression. And those things are used for attacking somebody in some way. That in a way, every gali is an act of power. Every bad word is an exercise of power. It's a power game. But the power game is done by humiliation, and the humiliation is executed by involving oral, anal, or phallic material. And of course, social conditioning in the context of which this becomes a bad word. Yes, please.
What I remembered somewhere in Erickson's or Kakkar's book was Gali is your own projection of what you cannot do. You are blaming it, accusing the other one of doing that. For
Correct.
example, having sexual relations with sibling or mother.
Correct. Correct. So one motivation of gali is bad words is it betrays the unconscious wish. Second root of it is it also has social roots, because many of them are learned in the process of growing up, and when aggression becomes too much and goes out of control of ego, then whatever is available in the memory is used indiscriminately. And that happens often in driving. If you are driving and you meet and you bang into somebody or somebody bangs into you, very unconsciously the bad words come out. You never had a desire for them. It was just an automatic response of what was learned. So that is social aspect of bad words. And then there is a cultural aspect of it. Like in one of the lectures, I forget the name. It'll come to me. The Canadian professor, I forget the name. I remember the face, but I forget the name. Anyway, it will come. He talks about anthropologists going into some tribes where bad words don't involve relationship with the mother, but they involve relationship with the sister. It's a very different kind of anthropological setup. So the third aspect is, and that also brings us to this idea that in many cultures you don't have many bad words. Like if you go to Nepal, you will have much lesser bad words than you will go to Punjab or you go to Haryana, or in any Gangetic plain for that matter. So cultures also vary by quantity of bad words they have and the qualitative aspect of what is the content of bad words. So there is a social aspect also, and there is a psychosexual developmental common aspect also. That in most cultures you will invariably find bad words involving Oedipal elements or incest elements. So, just as in dream work, we said that dream work involves disguising the real unconscious material into the manifest dream. Similarly, joke also is like a manifest dream. The real material in the unconscious is disguised by disguising work. So in dreams, we call it dream work. In jokes, we can call it joke work. That disguising unconscious activity, which disguises the real content and produces the joke or the manifest joke. And therefore, Freud said that if we look at defenses which are used in creation of jokes, we find many of the dream defenses are shared here. Defenses like condensation, displacement, substitution, symbolization, double meaning, wordplay, projection, these all are used in dreams and they are also used in jokes. And many of them are also used in myths and many of them are also used in bad words. So there is some sort of confluence when it comes to the manufacturing process of jokes and manufacturing process of dreams. And similarly, just as we need to interpret a dream to know its latent content, we need to interpret a joke to know its latent content. So there is something called joke interpretation, just as there is dream interpretation. Yeah, you're saying something.
If we were to imagine that with the changing times, a lot of improvements have taken place, maybe technological progress, scientific progress, so, or even in healthcare. So, is it possible that the unconscious of the masses will be cleaner and then perhaps the quality of jokes and myths will change? Because anything is rarely a taboo now. You can say anything openly.
Correct. Right. So that will have definitely an impact because much of what happens in the unconscious is because of repression.
Yes.
Now, if repression itself reduces, there is no doubt it will have a substantial effect on the unconscious. You are right. It will have definitely have an effect on the jokes, on the dreams, on the myths, on the bad words. And as education rises and repression reduces, I'm sure the quantity and the quality of bad words will undergo a change. I see that already. The new generation is not using so many bad words as the earlier generation.
Yes.
And even when you use it, that kind of violent feeling behind it is not there.
Not there. They can actualize it. So, less repression.
Correct. When dreams come true, they don't have to remain as dreams.
Yes.
That they can't remain as dreams. Then Freud goes into the process of laughter, why we laugh. One can see the obsession of how we take psychoanalysis everywhere. You have to be an OCPD to be this kind of a theoretician. I always say you can't be an artist unless you are bipolar in some way.
Yes.
And you can't be a good intellectual unless you are OCPD in some way. Because you need that consistency of engagement with the subject for 5,000, 10,000 hours, after which that expertise will come. So according to Freud, laughter is the discharge of psychic energy that was originally meant to keep a thought repressed. And obviously we have to limit Freud here. That every laughter is not involving a reaction formation defense. There can be laughter without pathology. There can be laughter which is involving not only repression but even reaction formation. And there can be laughter which is involving some sort of anxiety. And there can be laughter which is just fake laughter out of social occasions.
And mirthless laughter is described in schizophrenia.
Acha, say something more.
Mirthless laughter. There is no play, sad, no joy in it. And when you see that patient smiling or laughing, it raises hair on your body. You feel repelled and terrorized at the same time. I used to see a 6 foot tall patient when I was new in my practice, and he would complain of glass splinter being gone into his sole of the foot. And that had something to do with his pathological aggression against father and the family. And he was very revengeful. Doctor, immediately काच काढू दे. That is the way he would request. He
What
would
would he say?
stand very पायातली काच काढा ना माझ्या. And the flat voice would be flat, and he would smile mirthlessly and was standing very close to you. And he actually instilled fear in your mind. And when I took the history, the relatives told me that there have been doctors who got so impacted by his story that they had to do some drama and do a sham surgery, like taking an incision on his soul and showing him a glass piece. Look, we removed this. So, to such an extent, he used to frighten them. Sorry, I have.
It was very interesting. These laughters can be very, very meaningful.
Yes.
Because there is a very different laughter of a psychopath.
Yes.
And a very different laughter of somebody having a lot of sadness, who is using reaction formation. Like somebody has died and somebody is laughing. And it's very different from laughter of somebody where his lips are laughing but there is no emotion. So the isolation of affect is there. And there is a very different laughing of what you said, a very different kind of laughter where there is transfer of anxiety. Because of the split open, there is preponderance of violence and there is anxiety related to that violence. And that anxiety which is thrown out communicates that violence of which it is a result. And unknowingly you sense that violence.
Yes.
And that anxiety is worked upon in a small way by reaction formation, and it gives a laughter, but the isolation of affect is so much because of the negative features that this does not move, and the mask-like face remains mask-like even though the lips are separating. So
The eyes don't smile, they say.
correct, correct, correct. And this also becomes very mask-like.
Stiff, yeah, rubbery.
So Freud says jokes involve release of inhibition. A joke provides a bribe of pleasure that allows us to bypass our internal censor and pass through the repression barrier. Tendencies jokes, he says, these are purposeful jokes that let us express aggression, cynicism, or sexual desires in a socially acceptable way. Jokes also allow us to return to childhood. The child in us activates, and there is obviously a child in all of us. Humor allows adults to briefly return to an infantile state of play. We return to the state of play because in the process of adulthood, we have given up play. And play is something human beings want all their life. If they grow up, they play carom. If they grow up, they play chess, but they keep playing. Human beings can't give up play. Where strict rules of logic and social decorum don't apply. It also allows us to go back to our earlier state of magical thinking. And it also allows wish fulfillment and release of pathology. So these are all the things that jokes facilitate, and we see everyone indulging in it in some way or the other, and we see psychopathology everywhere of everyday life. So jokes, they release psychic energy, they bypass repression, provide humor provides relief, and there is a social function of jokes. Jokes are rarely told alone. There are very few jokes which we tell to ourselves. We do, but they are less. Most jokes are told in a social situation. They require a teller, a listener, and a shared understanding. If two people don't share the context, the joke cannot be understood. So it's a social process. They often strengthen group identity, and this is true not only of innocent jokes, even tendentious jokes. That they strengthen group identity. They allow the group to express prohibited criticism. They provide indirect rebellion against authority. Authority of a person, authority of somebody better than us, or authority of do's and don'ts of society. So let us look at some jokes. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because
they make up everything.
Everything. Let us look at some word plays. Atheism is a not-for-belief organization. Instead of not-for-profit, he is using not-for-belief. I have been to the dentist so often that I now know the drill. Having an egg for a lunch is hard to beat. The grammar lover had a lot of comma sense. How do they party at a construction site? They raise the roof. I did not understand how lightning worked till it struck me. I will not accept membership of a club that accepts people like me as its members. So you see a lot of wordplay here.
Yeah.
And in that wordplay, the first response is humor. But if we go deeper into it, we'll find our unconscious motivations, our unconscious fears.
Can I interrupt and tell a joke, small joke?
Please go ahead.
It is about V.S. Khandekar. I don't remember the full name. I remember the initials. Famous Marathi author, Vishnupanta Sakaram Khandekar or something like that. V.S. Khandekar. So he was known to be very straightforward and very docile, and who wrote novels like Yayati, Amrutvel, very ethical and conscientious kind of writing. So there is a story which goes like this. Visa Khandekar was teaching a Marathi class in his college, and he asked the students, gives them an assignment and tells them to bring a short story written on the next day at the next class. Short story as a form of literature. So
Right.
people bring them with them 4 pages, 10 pages, 20 pages, and all that. One student is not carrying anything. So they go to him and ask him, why you haven't done the assignment? He says, I have done it. Say, where is it? Then he takes out a small piece of paper from his pocket. He says, only this much. He said, yes. Why? So the student says, everything is included in that. You taught us last time that for a short story to be good, there has to be something about gods, there has to be something about romance, something about suspense, and the royal aristocratic environment. So now read the story. The story reads, राजकन्या म्हणाली, ही सेज बघा राजघराण्याचं झालं. राजकन्या म्हणाली, अरे अरे देवा, बघा देवाधिकाचं आलं. गेले वाटतं पुन्हा दिवस. बघा रोमांस आलं. यावेळी कोणाचे असतील बरं ते? Look at the suspense. So all four are included in just 4 lines. There
Right.
is,
So that's a very good example of how you twist a concept to invoke humor.
yeah,
So Freud's analysis has influenced today's humor theory, psychoanalysis. I mean, besides Freud's book, Psychopathology of Everyday Life, it has influenced humor theory, psychoanalysis, literary criticism, cultural studies. Even today, we see around that humor can often reveal hidden social tensions. And conclusion of jokes, Freud says, jokes are psychologically meaningful. They reveal repressed desires. They function similar to dreams. Humor provides emotional relief. And Freud transformed the way we understand humor and everyday life. Not only humor, but everyday life. That everyday life is not as innocent as we think. It's loaded with psychopathology.
thank
So
you. Sir.
this is we covered in short. It's a quite a book, but certain parts I took up which we can cover in one session, and then we can move on to other works of Freud, because this actually is a book where he does not uh, evolve new concepts or apply concepts to pathological conditions. He is just applying concepts that he has discovered in pathology to everyday life. In a way, it's a non-clinical application of psychoanalysis, applying psychoanalysis to everyday life. So it's a very good book. And
Yeah, I read it. I read it in '83.
oh,
So it was a great session reminiscing that.
right.
Thank you, sir. It is inspiring. I'll read it again
Sure.
soon enough. Thank you, sir.
Should we stop for the day?
Yes. Thank you.